Welcome to Miracles in the Middle, the podcast that celebrates the extraordinary stories of individuals navigating adversity and challenges in life. This podcast focuses on highlighting those who are in the midst of their journey, making remarkable progress towards their goals despite the obstacles they face. Our aim is to share the narratives of those who've discovered strength amidst difficulty and inspire others who may be experiencing similar situations. Whether you or someone you know is dealing with a challenging circumstance, we invite you to join us on this journey. Miracles in the Middle is a haven of hope, resilience, and community, where we celebrate the power of the human spirit to triumph over even the greatest of challenges.
Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Miracles in the Middle.
Woo!
I'm your co-host, Jared Swanson, along with my other co-host, Elizabeth. How you doing today?
Doing really good. I'm really excited to be back. It's my favorite time of week now when we get to come on and record these podcasts or podcast interviews and get to talk to everybody. So
Absolutely. And if you're watching this, you know we're not alone. We have Tina over here.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, why don't you introduce Tina?
Yeah, I wanted to introduce you to my good friend Tina Sosamea, I believe is how you say her last name.
Got it.
We've been friends for a few years, and I ran into her at a coffee shop last week, I think it was, or 2 weeks ago. And we were talking about this podcast and some things that she's going through. And I looked at her and I was like, you need to be on my podcast.
Yeah.
So I was excited to get you into the studio today and to talk to you and have you share a little bit of your story. I think it's going to be one that really grabs a lot of you. I was talking to my husband on the way up here on the phone about the things that Tina is walking through. There is a large camp of people who are dealing with the same thing. So I'm really excited to just have you share. So Tina is walking through a journey with fertility with her husband. And there's a lot of people walking through the same journey.
Yes.
And maybe you can carry it on from here so I don't butcher anything else.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here and to share my story and see who it can help, because I know when we're in the middle of the process, I always say it's easy to share something positive once you're out of it, but when you're in the middle of it, staying positive.
Yeah, totally.
And being encouraged is always hard. So hopefully my story provides that for some women out there.
Yeah.
But so my husband and I got married 3 years ago. I got married later in life. So almost 40 is when I got married, and knew I wanted to have kids. That was like one of the questions to him, because he has 3 girls. They're, teenagers now. So I stepped into like this stepmom life with teenagers, and it was a whirlwind going from being single by myself, and then all of a sudden I have a husband and 3 stepdaughters. Wow. And it was kind of, it was, it was. So that was like one of my main questions, like, are you open to having more kids? Because it's always just been a desire of mine.
Yeah.
And, my family, there's never been any issues with fertility. And so my sister, one of the things we had talked about in the dating world, I was like, what if I come across someone and they can't have kids? And I remember her response, especially now, being where I'm at, and she said, but you don't know if you'll ever have an issue, so you can't make that a reason not to be with someone.
Wow.
And so the way it stuck out to me, I was like, she's right. Okay. So it kind of released me of some things, but little did I know then that I would be on this journey now. And so, about I guess a year after we were married, we were like, okay, let's start trying. We want to expand the family. And it just wasn't happening. My younger sister and I started at the same time, and like a month later, she's pregnant. And I'm like, whoa, like, okay. All right, it's okay. We've got some time. And my older sister has 10 kids, and she's birthed all 10 kids, never had an issue. And so I just kind of thought like, oh, it's just, going to take me a little bit longer. And so we kind of just kept trying, and finally one of my friends was like, you're getting older, you should really go get looked at. And I was, at first I was kind of like, no, I didn't want to, because I really didn't want to know if there was an issue with me. And so I was like, no, we're good, we'll keep trying. So we tried for about a year before I went to the doctor. And then at that point I was like, okay, I can't like keep waiting because I'm not getting younger. And so I was like, let me go to the doctor, just see what they say. And so I had him go get tested first, because There's something about women and the women on this fertility journey that I've learned is we always think it's the guy.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is, but we do. And so I was like, oh, it's going to come back. It's him, and we'll figure that out.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it was not. And so then I knew immediately without even being tested that it was me. And that was kind of like a hard thing to like really accept even before getting the test done.
Right.
And so, especially because I waited so long to get married and prayed and had this season of waiting for, you know, just the person that I really wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I never wanted to rush into marriage. I never wanted to just marry for the sake of getting married. Like, I wanted it to be someone that I knew it would be a long-term life commitment. And so the fact that I waited that long and like really like held on to the hope of, you know, this person that I wanted to be with was a very long, hard journey.
Yes. And I watched her on this journey of waiting patiently for the right person that God had for you. And I watched how patient you were in the last few years, you know, and then God brought it along. And so I imagine now it's like the next level of desire that you have.
Yes, absolutely. And I knew too when I was going through that season of singleness to wait well. So I had heard this story about like you can choose your Ishmael or your Isaac. And so for those that know the Bible, that's the journey that I was kind of like, okay, do I want to rush the process and do things my way, or do I want to do it the way that God wants me to do it? And so it was really hard. And so I knew if I didn't learn the process of waiting well in that season, that I would have to experience it again. And we're all waiting for something, right? Like we're all in this season of waiting for an answer to some prayer. And so I knew it was going to come back up in my life. And so it was like I could either learn it then or I'd have to learn it later. And I'm so glad I learned it then, because it's helped me so much where I'm at right now.
Did you expect it to come up again so soon, though, where you would have something else again, where you're like waiting patiently and with longing and not sure which direction it's going to go? That has to be really hard.
It was very hard. I mean, it felt really unfair. I feel like through the process, like I'm not afraid to really express my emotions or my feelings to God. Like I don't think he's afraid of how we actually feel inside.
Yeah, he's not.
And so I was very much like, why would you have this be my story again? Like, why do I have to walk through this again? Like, can something be easy? That's just the emotional side of how I felt. Like, can something just be easy?
Right.
Do I have to keep fighting for everything that I want? And so, you know, it's just something that I had to take some time to really figure out, like, okay, am I going to still believe the things that I believe, even though it's not happening how I want it to happen?
Right.
And I think a lot of times when you're on a journey, I know a lot of people who don't believe in prayer and don't believe that God answers prayer. And I just believe that God doesn't answer prayer the way that we want him to answer prayer.
That's
not
huge.
That he doesn't answer prayer. It's just always not in our timing. And so I had to stand on, do I believe what I always talk about? Do I still believe he's good? Do I still believe he's going to answer my prayer, even if it's not how I think it should be answered? So I took all those feelings, went to the doctor, and found out it was me, and there was some problems there. And so after, you know, going through tons and tons of tests, which I think nobody really talks about the journey, it's kind of taboo to talk about fertility. And I like to call it fertility. We were talking about this before we started, and not infertility, because I'm not infertile.
No.
I just have a hard time conceiving. And there's so many different reasons why someone would have a hard time conceiving. Could be the husband, could be the wife, could be so many different things. And so if you're not like, even if you are diagnosed with like you're infertile, I still believe on like holding on to hope of things. And so I just decided there's power in my words. And I was like, I'm not going to call myself infertile. I'm not going to say my infertility journey. I'm going to say my journey with fertility. And
I love that.
Yes.
It's that act of reframing that I may have talked about last week. I don't know. I've been talking about it for the last week. Just the act of how we're saying things. And we talked about this a little bit before as well. But the act of how we're saying things, our bodies are literally listening to what our brains are saying and what our mouths are saying.
Yes.
And they're listening and then they're complying. So it's super important what's coming out of our mouths, and that whole act of reframing can completely change a situation potentially. Because you're leaving room for possibility.
Right.
And I think that's the difference with what you're saying.
Yes. It's like holding on to hope.
You're not calling it impossible.
Right.
You're saying there's a possibility.
Yes.
So I think that's really great.
Yeah. And so it's just kind of like, even if God doesn't do this the way that I think it should be, am I going to hold on to the hope? And part of that is like, it talks, what is faith? It's the evidence of things hoped for. So for me, the evidence that I'm holding on to are my words. Sometimes I go out and buy random things that like support what I'm holding on to. So like I have a little onesie on my dresser. And like I just pray over it, and I'm just like, God, your will be done. Like here's my desire, but your will be done. And so that's really how it all started. And that this has been about 9 months now since I got the official diagnosis. Moving on. And then it just kind of got to a point too where I just went before the Lord and just said, okay, so here we are, we're walking through this, we have to do IVF, there's no other option. What do we do? How do we pay for this? Because of my age and because of the situation, what normally most couples would have to go through 1 to 2 retrievals where they actually go in and retrieve the egg, I would have to do 4. Because of my situation. So the cost was double what someone would normally pay. And so I didn't know. I was like, how am I gonna pay for this? What's gonna happen? And I just really felt like the Lord was like, but you didn't even ask me if you were supposed to do IVF. Like you just did it. And I did, because sometimes we just kind of get in this motion of like, well, what's the next step? What's the next thing I have to do?
We want to fix it and make it better.
Immediately. Let's do this now.
Totally.
Yeah, and we listen to people around us who have been through it and who have been on these journeys, and they're just like, you need to do this. Don't wait. You're getting older. And so I just jumped the gun on it. And then just started praying. My husband and I just were like, we're just going to pray and ask God, like, what do you want? Because this is a desire we both have, but it's not happening. And without IVF, we don't know if it will happen. So we just put the pause on it, and we were praying. And then my husband took a job in October, which oddly enough was because we have to pay for insurance for his girls, and so we needed better insurance. And so he took this job because they have good insurance. Well, we didn't know, but in January, this company decided that they were going to incorporate IVF treatments into their insurance plan. So it was a total answer to prayer, where it was like, okay, God, that's why you wanted us to wait. Like, that's what that was for. And so I have to believe, too, that God lives outside of time. And so time to me, those couple months where doctors are like, you really shouldn't wait, I'm like, yeah, but God can do anything. Yeah, he can do anything. So,
and don't you think that God maybe sent that as just a sign of encouragement to you?
Oh, yes.
That he sees the situation. I always feel like when there's like little signposts along the way, it's not the answer we need per se, but it's like something leading towards that. It's just a sign that God's in it and he sees you.
Yes, I believe that.
And it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's really encouraging, because it's, you're praying, and it's not, I don't hear an audible voice of like, Tina, do this. So those little things to me are the way that God responds to my prayers.
I've noticed that too,
So I felt really, really hopeful and really encouraged come like January. It was just January this year. So we're still in the process, and we're still like just waiting on the Lord to like push us forward to the next step. So we're not on the other side of it yet. And I don't know what is to come, but I'm still hopeful, and I'm still waiting for his answer in his way. So it's not been an easy road. But through the process, through doing all of this, I've been very open about it. I've been very public about it. And I've posted things on social media. And that's really just because when I was single, and I grew up in a Christian environment, there was something also taboo about like celebrating your singleness. And I just felt like, because I was in my 30s and single, I'm like, I have to offer some encouragement, even just to myself, like that this is okay to be single in this time frame. because this is where God has me. So it has to be okay because I'm not forcing something.
Right.
I'm not just, dating whoever. And so through that season of just like waiting, I was like, I'm going to talk about it publicly. And after I met my husband, when I posted that I was finally like with someone and we were going to get married, the flood of messages I got about, you've stirred my hope. You've stirred like me to start praying back for the things that I'm waiting on. And people who weren't even waiting for a spouse, but they just saw the story.
Yes.
It just really hit me through this journey of like, it's so easy to share when the good is there. But what about when it hasn't happened yet? Like, where's the hope? Where's the encouragement?
In the middle places. That's why I'm so passionate about this podcast, because we're talking about things that people don't talk about. And that's why I wanted to have you on. I appreciate how vocal you've been on social media about a husband, and now God answered that prayer. And now about your journey with IVF. I think that people, it doesn't matter if it is a different situation for them, they connect to the hope.
Exactly.
That they see in you. And we all desperately need that hope. And I have felt like with my own story, I'm hoping in the middle right now too. I haven't had my prayers answered yet, but I know that God is doing things in his own time.
Yes.
But I think people watching us, we can give them hope, like they're not in the middle alone.
Right.
We're in the middle too.
Yeah.
And it gives them hope that they can get through their story, and that we're all kind of teaming up together and journeying together on this.
Yeah. It's important. We need each other.
Yeah.
We're built for community. So, and that's why I started to share it, because I didn't even know, even through my sharing, I've had so many women like, I've been down that road if you need to talk, or, just, hey, I met with somebody for coffee a couple weeks ago that I was like, oh, okay, we'll meet for coffee. I haven't heard from her in a good bit. And so we're sitting down just chatting about life and stuff. And then all of a sudden she's just opening up that they're struggling. And that like her friends are all moving on and having babies. And they're asking her like, when is it going to be your turn? When are you going to start trying? And I think that's the hard part, is because people don't realize, like, when you're asking a couple, when are you going to try? But yet they are, and they just know something isn't right. She just needed someone to talk to him. If I wasn't vocal about it, she would have felt alone through the process. And so I just encouraged her, like, go to the doctor. Like, knowledge is power. Go to the doctor and find out what it is, so you know where to go from here. And then hold on to like the faith and the hope of what you want.
Right. I've dealt with that fear before when I've been battling multiple sclerosis, especially when I have a flare-up. It's scary to go to the doctor because you don't know what they're going to say to you and how bad they believe it's going to get, or the damage is done to your brain already. So I love that you've been able to encourage others to not just hang out in the unknown, but to find out what's going on. I think the knowledge is power. And I think you leave yourself a lot more scared when you sit in the unknown. The unknown is very scary. It's not a fun place to hang out at all. And I know the unknown is, you're still hanging on to that in the middle, but to not equip yourself to the ability, that you can. And I think it's important to try to do that. How would you encourage someone who's also walking through this journey right now, just feeling really isolated and alone? What would you say to them? It sounds like people have been asking you these kind of questions already. What kind of feedback are you giving them? What kind of encouragement?
I think my number one thing I always tell them is, like, don't do this by yourself. Like, don't stay in isolation. It does something to you mentally, and it just causes you to downward spiral into hopelessness, into just feeling like, even as a woman, like, my body should be working. Like, this is what we were meant to do. And if you stay isolated, you're going to lose hope so fast. And so I really made it a point to not just surround myself with people by, like, my family and telling them, here's what's happening, here's what I'm going through. But then finding another woman that walked this road before me and being able to, like, dump everything out, like, hey, here's how I'm feeling. Is this normal? Because I needed someone to tell, who's gone before me, to tell me, like, okay, those are normal feelings. Or, hey, I had that test done too. It's just, it really breaks down the walls of isolation and makes you feel like, okay, if they had a baby and they went on this journey, then God can do that for me too.
And it gives you that hope. What would you say to someone who's kind of dealing with a little bit of guilt or shame about it, and just feeling like maybe it makes them feel a little bit broken, or they just there's like stigmas attached to it and everything. I'm sure that you have that as well. Like, what would you say to someone who's kind of dealing with that and just feeling broken because they can't get their needs met regarding a baby?
Yeah, that's such a hard one.
It's a hard one. I don't know if you even have the answer. I don't even know if I would have the answer.
Yeah.
But
I really would just encourage them to find out where their faith lies, because it will seem very hopeless. You will feel very much like broken in a sense if you don't really know who you are,
Right.
if you don't really know whose you are,
Yeah.
if you are just walking around like, not knowing what to do with yourself. You don't know what to do with your emotions. You don't know what to do with everything that you're feeling. And if you don't have a support system, if you don't have people pointing you to hold on to hope, it will feel like there's no way out of this feeling of like brokenness.
Right.
And so, I don't have the diagnosis of like you're infertile.
Right.
Even if I did, I would still hold on to hope because God's more powerful than, doctors know facts.
Right.
But God knows truth.
Yeah.
And so while the doctor might have facts, the word of God says that children are a blessing from the Lord.
Yeah.
And they're like quivers in your,
Yeah, that's
so
true.
I hold on to that. I'm like, to me, that's truth. Like those things are truth. And so I think you just have to find your people that are going to help support you and really speak life into you. And sometimes that might be looking for a group of women that are going through, trying to conceive journey and the IVF journey, and there's IUI, and there's all these different ways to go about it. And so I think if you're curious about adoption, because maybe you found out you can't get pregnant,
Right.
explore all those things. Talk to women on those journeys. Talk to other, people that are walking through the same thing to kind of help you see there's still life, there's still hope. It might not look like how you think, but when we walk out exactly what God has for us, it's better than we could have imagined.
Totally.
Yeah, I'd love to ask you a question around your husband's perspective, because I know there's going to be some guys listening to this, and it might be harder for them to relate, to the situation. But how has your husband supported you well, and maybe what advice would you give to other husbands out there?
Yeah, he's been so supportive. I mean, he really has encouraged me when I've felt like I don't know if this is going to happen. And he's just been like, no, what does the word of God say? And he's very gentle. Anytime I have a test done, he's like, can I get you something?
Aww.
Or always asking me how I feel. But I think the most important thing for men, because you're going through it too.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think
True.
it's important to have those conversations as a couple. Like, I asked my husband, like, are you okay? How do you feel? Like, is this scary for you? Like, there's so many emotions wrapped up for both of you, but I think you have to stay a united front because you don't know what the end result is. And so I think for husbands to really just encourage their wives in the season that they're in and in truth, and like, no matter what happens, like, we're going to get through this. No matter what happens, we're going to have a good life. Like, and it depends too, because I am not, for him, I'm not a wife who is walking around so depressed, just feeling so heavy. I'm really hopeful. And so I think it will be different for a husband whose maybe wife is feeling very hopeless and feels very heavy. I would encourage him to go together and like sit down with someone that they can talk to and really get out all of the emotions so he can understand where she's coming from.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And just hearing you, mention that, asking your husband how he's doing, because I even think about that, right? And it's definitely a journey together, and I think it comes back to not being alone and sharing it and seeking out other people that are going through the same thing or have gone through it. Is kind of the main theme with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's been good. It's been hard, but
very
good.
hard.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've handled everything really well, but if you could go back to the very beginning of this journey, is there anything that you would do differently, or is there any words of wisdom you would give your quote-unquote younger self, which maybe could help someone who's just now starting on this journey, that could give them hope? I know it's a loaded question,
Yeah.
but just thinking about if there's anything that you feel like you would change or ways that you would even treat yourself a little bit differently.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have waited so long to go to the doctor.
Okay.
I probably would have went sooner, but I was afraid to. I
Yeah.
didn't really want to know the truth of the situation.
Right.
So I probably would have done that. And then I probably would say for anyone who is walking this out, like, don't just give yourself a diagnosis. Don't just say, like,
That's good.
you know, I'm having, you know, we're infertile or I'm having these issues. Like, go get the knowledge
Yeah.
from the doctor, but then sit down and really, like, look at everything. And
Right.
I was just afraid to really dive into that world. I was,
I'm sure
like,
it was daunting.
yes, there's so much information
Yeah.
out there. There's so many people who, like, when you start to dive in, there's people who are like, you know, there's a podcast out there. I think it's called Kindred something. I can't remember the name, but they could never have kids. And so when I first started to, like, dive in and
Wow.
hear it, I was like, oh no, what if that's me? I don't know if I can handle that. And
Yeah.
it's like, I had to remind myself to also use wisdom. Like,
Yeah.
okay, if that scares me, then I don't need to listen to that right
Yeah.
now. And I need to find some other journey that speaks to where I want to be.
Yeah.
And so, again, I don't know what the end result is, but right now, pouring things in that are going to keep me positive and hopeful.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And like
Totally.
listening to podcasts that are helpful. There is one out there called As a Mother, and it's all stories of fertility journeys and, like,
Wow.
people trying to conceive. And that one is extremely helpful for
Yeah.
anybody who wants to listen. And she, like, goes on with her husband. They give, like, both points of view. It's really helpful to listen to.
That's really cool. I remember when, I've shared this before, but when I was first diagnosed with MS, and it's amazing what you can find out there that fits how you're feeling. And I think it's important to find the things that are positive and encouraging, like what you were saying.
Yeah.
But when I first started looking up information about MS, you're seeing all these people in wheelchairs, and your brain starts to follow down that path, and you start to think, oh my gosh, that's going to be me. And so I have found it equally as important in my journey to focus on the people who are doing well. And so there was a neurologist I found who started treating herself, and because she was a neurologist, she used to take medicine and everything. She tried all the medicines and stayed in her wheelchair, but when she branched outside of that and started doing holistic, she started getting out of her wheelchair. And so her name is Dr. Terry Walls, for all of you who would be interested in hearing more about that. I might include that in the show notes, actually, as well as your podcast that you mentioned. But I started following her, and I told myself, if she can do it, why can't I? So I think opening that realm of possibility in your mind, because what you were saying earlier, doctors tell facts, but God has possibilities that they don't even know of. And so I think it's important to keep your mind and your heart open to possibility.
Right.
And don't limit yourself, because your brain begins to kind of shut down when you hear these stories of the limits that these people have found.
Right.
So I'm really glad that you did that. I think that's really huge too, where you're at right now.
Yeah, because there's power in our thoughts.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
what we're thinking, right, it becomes who we are. And so we have to really take our thoughts captive. And
You're right.
how can you do that if you're filling your thoughts with nothing but awful stories of
limits,
things that, you know, you're looking at it. I mean, gosh, you Google anything and you're going to end up dying for something. And you're like, what is happening?
Yeah.
So I'm really like, okay, let's try to reflect on the good things. And my husband is so good with that. He's such a positive person.
That's awesome.
And he really helps me so much stay positive, because I do tend, it's still like training my brain. My brain wants to go to the negative so quickly.
Yeah.
And it's like retraining it. Like, no, let's
So
focus
good.
on the positive. And he really has been so good. So that's even another tip for husbands. Like, no matter what your wife is saying, and maybe not in that moment, maybe just give her a moment.
Give her a minute.
Yeah, give her a minute to get it out.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, I've read somewhere where someone says, okay, do you want an answer or do you just want comfort? And so, like, that's been something that we're working on, is like, do you want an answer to this or do you want comfort? And then when I want an answer, it's like, no, he's going to speak truth and he's going to tell me, like, but that's not how you need to think. You need to change your thought pattern. And that's so helpful, because I'm like, no, you're right. Like, if we really are humble to the suggestions and really listening to the person who knows us best, our spouse, it's like we're going to receive that and not take it negatively. We're going to be like, okay, I am being negative about this, and I need to change my thought pattern to keep the hope alive.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it helps to know that they have the best intentions because they do love you so much. So you can trust the source.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's powerful.
Yeah. And I think it's just good to be around positive people in general. You know, strength. Have you ever heard of strength finders?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the strengths is, you know, positivity. And some people are up there, and it's good to know. I think we all know those people that you meet with. You're like, wow, I feel energized, or just, you know, and if that's not you, regularly being around those people could do a lot of good.
Yeah. Yeah. Lift your spirits.
Yep. Because it's a hard journey for sure. It's been one that's wrecked me more than I thought it would. And I still have days where I cry. I still have days where I'm like, why do I have to go through this? This seems so unfair. Yeah. And there's still, you know, sometimes I just won't even go to a baby shower because I know, like, I just can't handle that. And it's not anything on the person who invited me. It's just I know in that moment, like, if I am going to sit there and wallow in and not celebrate, I have to take time to really think, like, okay, I need to then just not go. And I know for some people, they're like, oh my gosh, celebrate other people because you want that. And I agree, but you have to get to that place. You have to, like, get to the healing part to where you can celebrate other people. And so it's a process, and I'm in the middle of that process. And so I think, you know, it's okay. It's okay to be like, I can't be around that environment right now because it's not going to do good for my mental health. It's not going to do good for me leaving there and then not feeling like, gosh, why does everybody else get this and I have to fight for it? That's been my current thought process. Like, why am I fighting for this? Why do I have to fight for this? I mean, it's worth fighting for, that's for sure. But, you know, same thing with you. Like, your health is worth fighting for, but it's like some days you're just like wiped out from the fight. And so I think it's important to evaluate every time something comes up, like, okay, is this going to help me towards healing and hope, or is this going to push me further away?
Yeah. I love what you're saying. I love how you're reminding us to be gentle with ourselves, because I haven't always done that well, and I've pushed myself sometimes beyond my means because I wanted to keep up with everyone else physically sometimes, even in this industry as real estate agents. And I've realized physically I can't always do what everyone else is doing. And I love that you're being honest with yourself and acknowledging that and not pushing yourself too far and forcing yourself to accept something that you don't feel. I think that's part of the healing process. I bet you would agree. That to be gentle with ourselves and to be gentle with our hearts and where we're at, to be kind to ourselves. I think that's really, really important, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I think that's a huge part of healing.
Oh, absolutely. I think on anything that we're experiencing in life, we have to, like, reevaluate where our position is with our emotions, our mind, like all of that, because our body works as one. Yeah. So, like, if one part of you is off, it's going to affect the rest of you. And so
true.
It's just one of those things, like stress. We were talking about stress on the way in, and I mean, that's like the number one thing they tell you when you're on this journey of trying to conceive, like, don't be stressed. And I'm like,
well, that stresses you out. Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that does stress me out. But then how do you get rid of stress in your life when those things don't disappear?
Right.
And so I think that's where it's like, again, going back to the Lord and saying, like, okay, I'm not supposed to worry. I'm not supposed to worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow has worries of its own.
Yeah.
But I am worried about tomorrow. Like, is this going to happen for me? And so it is also learning that balance of, like, do I really trust the Lord? Yeah. Do I really trust that He's good? All of that, I think, is a journey and a process. Yeah. And I think if we can, as people who believe in God, as people who, like, really look at the Bible and go, I believe that this is true, then we need to be true about where we are emotionally and mentally as well, and not just try to fake it till we make it, so to speak, but actually be like, you know what? That doesn't make me feel good, and I need to find out why. Yeah. And so that's where I'm at with, like, getting invited to baby showers. It doesn't make me feel good, and I need to figure out why. Like, why is it hitting me so hard?
What does it bring up in you? Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah. Like, to kind of acknowledge that.
Yeah, and, you know, on the other side of it, too, being open and transparent, people will know, too, you know, you're not trying to offend them for not going. Right. You know, it's
that's a good point.
Yeah, and also, too, you just never know their story, too, because it's not spoken very often, and so maybe they had issues too, and you only see the end result. So I'm just thankful for you coming on here and sharing your story, and you're in the middle of it.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say this too for family members of those walking through it, because I know as family it can be like, do I ask questions? Do I not ask questions?
Yeah.
I think it's important to ask each person, like, what would be helpful to you? Like, my family knows I don't mind the questions. Now, it doesn't mean I'm always going to answer the question, and it doesn't mean you're always going to get a response, but I don't mind the question. And so I think that's important to, like, ask your loved ones, like, do you want us asking questions? Because some people are curious just because they don't know anybody who's been there. My family doesn't know this journey that well, and so they're just curious. But for some women, it might be really hard to talk about, and it's not that the family's being insensitive. It's like, you have to remember your family might just be curious. So tell them what you need from them. Tell them, like, I might not be able to answer your questions, or, maybe you need your family to understand, like, I don't want you to ask me questions. Tell them where you're at and what you really need from them. And I think most of the time, family will, and friends will respect that. And so I've said that on social media because I'm so public about it. People feel like they can ask me anything, which they can, but I've just been like, you can ask, but please don't expect me to give you an answer, because some of it is private. Some of it is just between my husband and I.
Right.
Even though I'm being very open about the journey, I think it's important to just remind everybody, like, yes, I'm being open, but there are still some things that I'm working through because I'm not on the other side.
Right. Those are great boundaries that you set. I really like that.
Oh, thanks.
I feel like, I won't say it forced you, but I feel like it's caused you to really have to work on communication and how you're communicating with others. And my therapist used to say to me a long time ago, like, ask for what you want and need. And it's kind of put you in this place where you really have to be intentional about what you're asking, and then also what you're sharing, and just really hone in on that communication. It sounds like it's a huge part of this journey. I actually wouldn't have thought of that. What a huge role it plays on it. On a situation like this.
It really does.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing your story, your journey, and just I know it's gonna uplift a lot of people. And
I hope so.
Where would be best for someone, if they're listening to this, to connect with you?
I'm on Facebook and Instagram, so either one is easy. Just type in my name and there I am.
Yeah.
All right, we'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, we sure will. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, and just for being vulnerable and honest and real. I think it's a beautiful platform that you have, one that I know you never would have asked for.
Right.
But here we are.
Yeah.
And it's going to be good, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And thank you for being honest with that. And I think that you are the voice. It's going to make me cry. But you're a voice to a lot of people who don't have a voice in this. And there's a lot of people, I think, that are hurting in this journey. And so it's just amazing to me that you are a voice for them. And I really think it's beautiful, and it's going to touch a lot of lives.
Well,
so
thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening. You can catch another episode of this airing soon. And that's a wrap.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you for tuning in today. We're so grateful that you chose to join us. Our hope is that this podcast can help you or someone you know who may be facing challenging times, and that it can serve as a source of encouragement and inspiration.
And if you yourself have a story that you want to share with us, please do. You could do that at miraclesinthemiddle@gmail.com.
Special thanks to producer and editor Grant Bertan and Simply Home for making Miracles in the Middle podcast possible.